So we're going to be working on a Jaguar E-Type 1967. This is a Series 1 Jag, and in this video we'll be showing you guys how to do the starter motor upgrade. So the basics of air cleaner will have to be removed, bonnet will have to be open. You're going to remove the vacuum tank and the lower panel and be able to work through this pocket here. A 9/16 swivel socket with about a 24 to 36 inch extension, whatever works for you. Through here to access the lower bolt hole will have to be procured. You can use a bunch of extensions, but then it adds a lot of flex to it. The nut is on there pretty well, so your best bet is going to try and use one piece extension and or a locking extension on a 1/4 inch drive. But again, it's going to be a 9/16 socket, and you'll access it through this lower section with the pan removed and the vacuum tank. So moving to the inside of the car, the carpet and transmission tunnel are stripped back to show the insulation and the access plate. The access plate allows you to the bolt side for the lower starter bolt, which is necessary to be removed. It threads in through the starter, and then there's the lock nut on the other side, which I showed you earlier in this video. A 9/16 socket with an extension, 1/4 inch drive really helps. But you're going to want to break it with a 3/8. It's in there pretty tight. If the car is original, it should be a little bit tighter. If it's been replaced, hopefully they didn't gun it in there. But space is extremely limited. I have very large hands. This was not an easy task to do. You're pretty much working in the pedal box area if it was a right-hand drive car. Takes me a little bit here to get this far enough out and loose to where I was able to spin it. Switch back and forth between wrenches, needle nose pliers, and swivel socket, I believe on a 1/4 inch drive. Once this is done, you should be able to slide the starter out. Keep in mind there is a starter locating plate. Don't drop it into the bell housing. It shouldn't be able to fall in, but that doesn't mean it's never happened. Success. That felt like the longest bolt ever. So now with that bolt removed, we'll work our way back underneath the hood. As you can see here, the different size in starters. As always, with a starter that's indexable, always test fit this. Don't just commit to this from the jump. You're going to want to make sure that the orientation of the hump and the battery positive terminal are away from the block, that this was done. People do make mistakes. You're going to want to remove your nuts and washers. Like I said, there is a starter alignment plate that goes into the bell housing. You're going to want to make sure that that's in place. Make sure it fits, and you're not going to have to take a file to the starter. Just a test fit is just general good practice, just to make sure it'll get in there. As you can see, it's a lot smaller than the original starter and weighs significantly less. So once that's done, just double check everything looks good. Make sure that the adjustment plate bolts to the actual starter, the indexing plate bolts, are tight. I have had them come loose once before in shipping on a different vehicle. So once those have been inspected, you should be good to go. As you see there, that dark plate at the front of the transmission bell housing is the starter shim plate. That must be reused with the starter when doing the swap. Keeps the starter oriented perfectly where it needs to be. Very important piece. Sorry for the Poor video here. I was trying to do this with one hand and record with the other. You see here, fight it a little bit during test fitting just to make sure that it goes in. Just be careful. I had this happen to me several times while doing this. You end up getting the top hole in, but not the bottom every time because the angle feels funky. So if you can have someone to hold the flashlight and yell at them that they're holding it wrong, now would be that time. As much light as possible while doing this job is highly recommended, as well as draining the coolant system so that you're not fighting any of the coolant hoses at the back of the intake manifold to the firewall. So as you see here, I had test fit it, so I knew it would go in, but it was just slightly off, which caused it to be a tight clearance to fit, which is what you're going to want. You don't want it sloppy in there. You want it to fit pretty well. Double check that both bolt holes went in because the alignment plate can move off of the transmission index. Once that is done, you're going to try and figure out a way to sneak some washers and nuts in there, get the top bolt secured, make sure everything looks good, and then just give it a quick once over. Make sure that this starter isn't hitting the block. This way, once it's tightened down, it'll hold in place properly. I have the fuel line held out of the way with a zip tie. That is not where it goes. It should not be rubbing against anything at any time, but this was just done just to make my job easier. So I'm literally standing just at the side of the car. I'm doing this on a lift, so it's a lot easier than doing this on the floor. But again, you're just going to want to make sure that the index of the actual motor doesn't hit the block, which is a possibility.